On a freezing Thanksgiving evening, I sat at the far end of an opulent 12-foot mahogany dining table. The room was dripping with crystal chandeliers, imported Italian floral arrangements, and the suffocating scent of expensive perfume. I was 32 years old, wrapped in a heavy, oversized cashmere sweater that I hadn't taken off in 6 weeks, my hands trembling slightly as I held a crystal water goblet. My Uncle Richard, a wealthy corporate attorney who had managed my late grandfather's estate, looked at me with deep, sympathetic eyes. "Clara," he said softly, his voice cutting through the clinking of fine silver. "Has the $15,000 a month Amanda has been sending you from the trust finally made your recovery comfortable?" I didn't answer immediately. I slowly lowered my water glass to the table. I looked down at my hands that had spent the last 2 months typing lines of revolutionary cybersecurity code in a house that was consistently 45 degrees Fahrenheit. My breath had hung in the air like a ghost every single morning. "Uncle Richard," I said, my voice steady, carrying the quiet, dangerous calm of a woman who has endured the absolute limits of human betrayal. "I haven't had heat in the estate since October 4th. The boiler has been deliberately shut off. I have been sleeping in a ski jacket and 2 sleeping bags for 7 weeks. His face changed. It didn't happen all at once. First there was profound confusion, then the rapid calculation of an attorney, and finally a dark, horrified realization. "What do you mean you haven't had heat?" Richard demanded, the temperature in the dining room plummeting instantly. "I mean the fuel tank is bone dry," I replied, my eyes locking onto my older sister Amanda, who was sitting at the head of the table. "I mean the utility accounts were cancelled. I mean I haven't seen a single cent of that $15,000 a month." Amanda's face lost every drop of its color. The $200 Cartier earrings dangling from her ears suddenly looked very heavy. She opened her mouth, a rehearsed, patronizing smile attempting to stretch across her face. Clara is just confused, Richard. Her medication makes her exaggerate things." I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I simply reached under my chair, pulled out a thick, meticulously organized manila folder and dropped it onto the mahogany table. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud. "I am not confused, Amanda," I said, a cold, empty smile touching my lips. "And I am definitely not exaggerating, but why don't we look at the financial routing data? Here is the story of how a woman they dismissed as a broken, traumatized liability took back her dignity, exposed a massive financial fraud, and dismantled a toxic golden child's entire existence with an $800 million bombshell." Welcome back to the channel. If you have ever been the scapegoat of your family, if you have ever been gaslighted into believing you are the problem while they drain your resources, stay with me to the very end. Drop a comment below to let me know where you are watching from, and be sure to subscribe. My name is Clara Vance. I am 32 years old and I am the architect of my own justice. Let me take you back to the beginning so you can fully understand the architecture of this betrayal. I am a cybersecurity engineer. For the past decade, I have lived entirely in the digital shadows, building encryption protocols for high-level corporate clients. I am the person you call when a billion-dollar company suffers a data breach. I trace the invisible lines of code, I find the leaks, I secure the vault, but to my family, I was just Clara, the antisocial tech geek who spent too much time staring at screens. My older sister Amanda was the undeniable golden child. She was 36, a high-society event planner who ran a company called Vance & Delacroix Luxuries. She wore designer clothes, attended charity galas, and possessed a unique talent for making everyone around her feel like an extra in the movie of her life. 14 months ago, my life was violently derailed. I was involved in a severe multi-car collision on the interstate. I sustained multiple fractures, a severe concussion, and a spinal injury that required 3 surgeries. The doctors told me I would need at least a year of intensive physical therapy and absolute, stress-free rest to walk normally again. My grandfather, who had passed away a few years prior, had established a comprehensive medical and living trust for his grandchildren in the event of a catastrophic emergency. It was designed to pay out $15,000 a month to cover private nursing, premium rehabilitation, and living expenses. Because I was hospitalized and heavily medicated at the time, the family attorneys appointed Amanda as the temporary executor and trustee of my specific fund. "Just focus on healing, Clara," Amanda had told me, sitting by my hospital bed in a stunning Chanel blazer. "I will handle all the finances. I'll make sure the estate is maintained and your bills are paid. You don't need to worry about a thing." I trusted her. That was my first mistake. But when you are lying in a hospital bed, physically broken and exhausted by pain, you desperately want to believe that your family has your best interests at heart. When I was finally discharged, I moved into our grandfather's remote property in the Catskills, a beautiful, sprawling stone house that I had inherited. It was isolated, quiet, and perfect for recovery. I couldn't walk without crutches, and I certainly couldn't drive. I was entirely dependent on the supplies and the care that the $15,000 a month was supposed to provide. At first, things seemed normal. Amanda set up an automatic grocery delivery, and a physical therapist came to the house twice a week. But slowly, subtly, the noose began to tighten. By September, the physical therapist stopped coming. When I called the clinic, they informed me that my account was entirely delinquent, and my services had been canceled by my financial representative. When I asked Amanda about it, she sighed heavily into the phone, her voice dripping with condescending exhaustion. "Clara, the trust is it's a bit tied up right now in low liquidity assets," Amanda lied smoothly. "And you're doing so much better. You can do your exercises on your own. We need to be frugal. The estate taxes were higher than expected. I let it go. I was too tired to fight." Then came October 4th. I woke up, and I could see my breath in the air. The temperature in the stone house had plummeted to 50 degrees overnight. I managed to get out of bed, leaning heavily on my crutches, and made my way down to the basement. The massive industrial-grade oil boiler sat in the dark, completely silent. I checked the digital runtime counter. It had stopped at 2:14 a.m. I checked the mechanical fuel gauge on the massive 500-gallon tank. It was entirely empty. I immediately called the local heating oil company, a reliable family-owned business that had serviced the estate for 30 years. I got a customer service representative on the line. "Hi, this is Clara Vance at the Catskills estate," I said, shivering in the cold basement. "My boiler is out of fuel. I'm on the automatic delivery schedule, but no one came this month." There was a pause, followed by the clicking of a keyboard. "Miss Vance, I'm looking at your account right now. Your automatic delivery service was permanently canceled on September 28th. "Canceled? By who?" "By your authorized representative, Amanda Vance. She submitted a notarized power of attorney document via email, requesting immediate cancellation of all services to save costs." A cold, heavy knot formed in my stomach, a knot that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. "Can you email me a copy of that power of attorney document?" "Of course, Miss Vance, sending it now." I went upstairs, my teeth chattering, and opened my laptop. The PDF arrived in my inbox. I opened it. There at the bottom of the legal document granting Amanda total financial control over my assets and utilities was my signature. It wasn't my signature, it was a sloppy round forged imitation. "I am a cybersecurity architect." I signed my name with sharp, precise angular strokes. This signature looked like it had been drawn by someone who had only glanced at my handwriting once. Amanda had forged my signature to cut off the heat to my house. I sat in the freezing kitchen, wrapped in a blanket, and I started thinking like an engineer. I didn't panic. I didn't call her and scream. Calling her would only give her the opportunity to spin a lie, to gaslight me, to tell the rest of the family that my brain injury was making me paranoid. Amanda thought she was dealing with a crippled, depressed woman who was too weak to fight back. She had absolutely no idea who she was actually dealing with. She visited 4 days later. She pulled up the long gravel driveway in a brand new gleaming white Porsche Cayenne. She stepped out wearing a designer cashmere coat, knee-high leather boots, and a silk scarf. She did not take off the coat when she walked inside. "Clara, sweetie, how are you?" she chirped, carrying a single brown paper grocery bag. She set it on the granite counter. Inside were 4 cans of generic soup, a loaf of cheap bread, and a box of crackers. She handed me a white envelope with both hands, like she was presenting me with a prestigious award. "I brought you some essentials," she said, flashing that brilliant, empty smile. "And here is $400 in cash for whatever incidentals you need." $400? Out of 15,000, Amanda, I said, my voice intentionally weak and wavering. "It's freezing in here. The boiler stopped working. I think we ran out of oil." Amanda tilted her head, feigning perfect sympathetic concern. "Really? Oh, honey, that's terrible. I'll look into that right away. You know how unreliable these old rural heating systems can be. Maybe the oil company just missed a route." She didn't check the thermostat. She didn't go down to the basement. She simply pulled out her phone and snapped 3 photos of me. One of me standing in the cold kitchen in my oversized sweater, one of the soup cans, and one of the cash on the counter. "Just for the family update group chat," she said brightly. "Uncle Richard worries about you so much. I need to show him you're doing okay." She was in the house for exactly 18 minutes. I timed it. She left me in a 45-degree house with 4 cans of soup and drove away in a Porsche. I watched her taillights disappear down the driveway. Then I turned around, went into my grandfather's old oak-paneled study and locked the door. I fired up my encrypted, custom-built workstation, my fingers, though stiff from the cold, flew across the mechanical keyboard with the practiced lethal precision of a predator hunting its prey. You do not steal from a cybersecurity engineer. You especially do not steal from one who has absolutely nothing to do but sit in a freezing room and trace digital footprints. I started with the trust account. I bypassed the standard banking portal and used a series of backdoor penetration techniques I had designed myself to access the raw routing data. The numbers flowed across my monitors in lines of green code. There it was every single month. On the first of the month, the trust deposited exactly $15 into an intermediary account managed by Amanda. And every single month, exactly 24 hours later, $1,400 was transferred out of that intermediary account. Where was it going? I traced the routing number. It didn't go to an investment portfolio. It didn't go to an emergency medical fund. It went directly into the primary business checking account of Vance and Delacroix Luxuries. Amanda was laundering my medical trust fund to keep her failing, debt-ridden event planning business afloat. She was stealing the money meant for my physical rehabilitation to pay for her Porsche lease, her designer clothes, and the lavish parties she threw to maintain her illusion of high society dominance. I didn't stop there. An engineer never stops at the surface level. I dug deeper. I pulled the utility records. Amanda hadn't just canceled the heating oil, she had canceled the premium homeowner's insurance policy on the estate, pocketing the massive premium refund. She had canceled the private security monitoring. She was systematically stripping the estate of every single protective measure, leaving me completely vulnerable just to squeeze out a few thousand extra dollars. I documented everything. I took screenshots of the routing data, the IP addresses, the timestamps of the fraudulent transfers. I downloaded the forged power of attorney document. I created a massive, heavily encrypted dossier, but I needed one more piece of evidence. I needed physical, undeniable proof of her malice, something that couldn't be dismissed as a banking error. I used a secure line to call an old colleague of mine, a private investigator who owed me a favor for recovering his compromised servers a few years ago. "David," I said, my breath pluming in the cold air of the study. "I need you to run a full financial background check on Vance and Delacroix Luxuries. I need their debt-to-income ratio, outstanding loans, and vendor payment history. And I need a physical tail on my sister Amanda Vance. I want photographs of everything she purchases over the next 2 weeks." "Consider it done, Clara," David replied. "Are you okay?" "You sound like you're freezing." "I am," I said, "but the cold keeps me focused." For the next 6 weeks, I lived in that freezing house. I wore a heavy ski jacket, thermal leggings, and wool gloves with the fingertips cut off so I could type. I bought a small, cheap ceramic space heater with the $400 Amanda had given me, and I kept it pointed directly at my hands. But I wasn't just investigating Amanda, I was working. Before the accident, I had been in the final stages of developing a proprietary, quantum-resistant encryption algorithm. It was the kind of technology that multinational tech conglomerates and federal defense agencies spend billions trying to create. During those 6 weeks in the freezing silence of the Catskills with no distractions, no physical therapy, and no heat, I finished the code. I deployed a secure encrypted presentation to 3 of the largest tech companies in the world. I held virtual board meetings wrapped in blankets, positioning the camera so they couldn't see my breath in the air. On November 18th, I signed a digital acquisition contract with a global tech titan. They bought my proprietary algorithm and the shell company I had created to house it in a hostile, highly competitive bidding war. I sold the company for $800 million. The wire transfer cleared. 3 days later, I stared at the balance on my screen, $800. I was sitting in a 42-degree room, shivering violently, eating cold canned soup, and I was one of the wealthiest self-made women in the country. I didn't tell a single soul. I didn't buy a new car. I didn't even turn on the heat. I simply added the acquisition documents to a separate, locked file on my desktop, and I waited for Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving was Amanda's grandest performance. She hosted it at her rented luxury penthouse in the city. She invited our entire extended family, Uncle Richard, our aunts, our cousins, and her wealthy socialite friends. It was designed to showcase her success, her impeccable taste, and her boundless generosity in caring for her crippled sister. I arrived in a hired town car, using my crutches to navigate the elevator. I wore the same oversized cashmere sweater I had been wearing for weeks. I looked pale, thin, exactly like the broken victim Amanda needed me to be. When I walked into the penthouse, Amanda rushed over, enveloping me in a cloud of Chanel No. 5, oh my brave girl. She practically shouted, ensuring everyone in the room was watching. She kissed my cheek, holding me gently so no one would miss the optics of her sisterly devotion. I am so glad you could make it. I know it's so hard for you to travel. Thank you for having me. Amanda, I said, my voice meek. We sat down at the magnificent mahogany table, the wine flowed, the laughter echoed. Amanda held court, telling exaggerated stories about her latest celebrity event planning gig. And then, right on cue, Uncle Richard turned to me and asked the question that would detonate the entire evening. Clara, has the $15,000 a month Amanda has been sending you from the trust finally made your recovery comfortable? And that brings us back to the moment I dropped the heavy manila folder onto the table. I haven't had heat in the estate since October 4th, I said, my voice silencing the entire room. The fuel tank is empty. I've been sleeping in a ski jacket for 7 weeks. What do you mean? Richard demanded. I looked at Amanda, watching the panic rise in her chest like a tidal wave. Amanda forged a power of attorney document, I said, my words clear and precise. She canceled the automatic oil delivery to save money. She canceled the homeowners and insurance. She intercepted the $15,000 a month, transferred it into her failing business account, and gave me exactly $400 in cash to survive on. That is a lie, Amanda shrieked, her voice cracking. She is lying, Richard, you know she has a brain injury. She is paranoid. I have been sending her everything. I didn't argue, I simply opened the folder. Tab 1, I said, sliding a stack of papers toward Richard. The banking routing data, it shows the exact transfer of $14,600 from the trust intermediary account directly into Vance & Delacroix Luxuries every single month for the past year. Tab 2, the forged power of attorney document verified by a forensic handwriting expert I hired. Tab 3, the cancellation logs from the heating oil company and the insurance provider. Richard, a veteran corporate lawyer, put on his reading glasses. He flipped through the documents. The silence in the room was absolute, deafening. Every eye was fixed on him. Amanda, Richard said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, lethal whisper. These routing numbers, this is undeniable wire fraud. You forged a legal document to cut off your disabled sister's heating oil in the middle of winter. I was going to pay it back. Amanda burst into tears, real desperate tears. The business was struggling. We lost 2 massive galas. I just needed a bridge loan. She was fine in that house. She didn't need that much money. She just sits on her computer all day doing nothing. I don't do nothing, Amanda, I said softly. I reached into the back of the folder and pulled out a single heavily redacted sheet of paper. It was the confirmation of the wire transfer from the Federal Reserve. You see, I continued, my voice echoing in the silent dining room. While you were stealing $15,000 a month from my medical fund to pay for your Porsche lease, and leaving me to freeze in a stone cabin, I was actually working. I finished the cybersecurity protocol I've been developing for the last 3 years. I slid the single sheet of paper down the mahogany table. It stopped directly in front of Amanda. I sold my company 3 days ago, I said, staring directly into her terrified, tear-streaked eyes. For $800 million, the sound that left Amanda's throat was not a word. It was a strangled, suffocating gasp. She stared at the number on the paper, 8 followed by 8 zeros. It was a number so incomprehensibly massive that it completely short-circuited her reality. Uncle Richard dropped the banking documents. He stared at me as if I had just commanded the sun to rise in the west. 800 million. Richard whispered. Yes, I said, standing up. I didn't need my crutches to stand. The physical therapy I had paid for out of pocket with my own hidden reserves had worked perfectly. I stood tall, straight and unbroken. You thought I was weak, Amanda, I said, looking down at my sister. You thought because I was quiet and because I was hurt that I was easy prey. You wanted my resources, but you didn't want to look at my face. You thought you could freeze me out, Clara. Please, Amanda sobbed, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Please, I'm your sister. You have $800 million. You can save the business. You can drop the charges. Please, I'll go to jail. I looked at her. I felt absolutely nothing, no anger, no pity, just the cold clinical satisfaction of a closed loop. You're right, I said quietly. I do have $800 million, and you are going to federal prison for wire fraud. Elder abuse, since the trust was technically still under grandfather's federal protection clause, and forgery. I picked up my crutches purely for effect and turned toward the door. Clara, Amanda screamed, lunging across the table. I didn't turn back. I walked out of the penthouse, leaving the heavy mahogany doors open behind me. I took the elevator down to the lobby, stepped into the freezing New York air, and got into the waiting black SUV that I had purchased in cash that morning. Here is the ledger because I know you want the final accounting. Uncle Richard, acting as the executor of the larger estate, immediately froze all of Amanda's assets. He handed my dossier directly to the district attorney. Amanda was arrested 3 weeks later. The physical evidence, the routing numbers, the forged signatures, the IP logs was insurmountable. She pleaded guilty to avoid a drawn-out trial and was sentenced to 4 years in a federal facility. Her event planning business filed for bankruptcy, her Porsche was repossessed, her socialite friends, the ones who had laughed and drank wine at that Thanksgiving table, vanished overnight. High society does not tolerate the stench of federal indictments. And me? I went back to the Catskills estate, but this time I completely renovated it. I installed a state-of-the-art geothermal heating system. I hired a private chef and a world-class physical therapist. I healed completely. I didn't buy a yacht or a private jet. I took a portion of the $800 million and established a massive, heavily endowed trust fund specifically for victims of financial abuse. I employ a team of forensic accountants and corporate lawyers who do nothing but trace stolen money and dismantle toxic guardians' hips. People ask me sometimes if I regret doing it at Thanksgiving. If I regret dropping the bomb in front of the entire family and destroying the holiday. I tell them I don't regret a single second. The holidays are exactly when toxic families demand your compliance. They use the aesthetic of family gatherings to enforce their hierarchy. They expect you to sit quietly, eat the turkey, and pretend you aren't bleeding. I refuse to bleed quietly. If you take one lesson from this story, let it be this: your silence does not protect you from people who view your existence as a resource to be mined. Love people freely but never hand over the keys to your survival. Keep the bank accounts locked, read every single line of the contract, and if someone ever shuts off the heat in your house, do not cry. Gather the evidence, build your empire in the cold, and wait for the perfect moment to burn their illusion to the ground. That is my story: a frozen cabin, a stolen medical fund, and an $800 million check that balanced the ledger forever. If this story empowered you, if it reminded you that your quiet strength is your greatest weapon, hit the subscribe button, drop a comment below, and share your own stories of breaking free from toxic control. I read every single one. Turn on notifications, and remember, the woman they underestimate the most is usually the one writing the final code. I'll see you in the next video, but before we get to the absolute demolition of Amanda's carefully constructed reality, you need to understand the slow, suffocating process of being frozen out. When a toxic family member decides to eliminate you, they rarely do it all at once. They don't walk into your house and declare war. They do it by degrees. They sever your lifelines one invisible thread at a time, smiling sweetly while they watch you slowly drown in the isolation. The first lifeline to go was the physical therapy. Because of the severe spinal trauma from the accident, my doctors had prescribed a highly specialized regimen of aquatic and neuromuscular rehabilitation. A private therapist, Dr. Eris Thorne, was supposed to visit the Catskills estate twice a week. At $250 an hour, it was an expense the $15 monthly trust fund was specifically designed to cover. But by late September, Dr. Thorne stopped showing up. When I managed to get his billing department on the phone, the receptionist sounded genuinely apologetic. "Miss Vance, I'm so sorry, but your account is over 60 days delinquent. We received a formal notice from your trustee, Amanda Vance, stating that your medical fund has been drastically reduced due to unforeseen market volatility, and that all private, in-home services must be terminated immediately." Market volatility: my grandfather's trust was held in municipal bonds and guaranteed federal treasury notes. It was the least volatile financial instrument in the Western Hemisphere. When I questioned Amanda about it during her next brief phone call, she deployed her signature weapon: weaponized pity. "Oh, Clara, sweetie," she sighed, the condescension practically dripping through the receiver. "I didn't want to worry you with the financial stress. The lawyers are dealing with some very complicated tax liens on grandfather's older properties. The liquid cash just isn't there right now, but honestly, you don't need a fancy private doctor coming to the house. You can just look up some stretches on YouTube. You're so smart with computers, I'm sure you can figure it out." I didn't argue, I didn't beg. When you are dealing with a covert narcissist, begging is simply providing them with the emotional currency they crave. They want to hear the desperation in your voice. They want to know their power over you is absolute. I simply said, "Okay, Amanda," and hung up the phone. I began doing the physical therapy myself every morning, wrapped in a heavy sweater, I dragged myself across the hardwood floors. I used the heavy oak banisters of the grand staircase to pull myself up, forcing my damaged muscles to bear weight. The pain was excruciating. Sometimes I would collapse on the floor, gasping for breath, tears of pure agony streaming down my face. But I never called her to complain. I knew that every tear I shed in silence was a down payment on my eventual revenge. Then the cold crept in. The Catskills in October are unforgiving. The colorful autumn leaves quickly give way to bitter, biting winds that howl down from the mountains. The estate, built in the 1920s, possessed beautiful drafty sash windows and thick stone walls that held the cold like a tomb. When I woke up on October 4th and discovered the boiler had been permanently disabled, and that the heating oil delivery had been cancelled via a forged power of attorney, the true scale of Amanda's cruelty crystallized in my mind. She wasn't just skimming off the top of my medical fund. She was actively trying to break me. She wanted me to freeze. She wanted me to become so desperate, so physically and mentally broken by the cold and the isolation, that I would voluntarily commit myself to a state-run facility, granting her permanent, uncontested control over the entirety of my grandfather's multi-million-dollar trust. She miscalculated. She calculated based on the assumption that I was a victim. She forgot that I am a predator in the digital realm. The day after Amanda visited in her gleaming white Porsche, leaving me with $400 and 4 cans of soup, I initiated the most comprehensive cyber investigation of my life. I didn't just hack the trust accounts, I dismantled Amanda's entire digital existence. I bypassed the dual-factor authentication on her personal and business accounts using a mirrored token protocol. I sat in my grandfather's freezing study, the ceramic space heater inches from my trembling hands, and I read her emails, I read her bank statements, I read her text messages. The financial rot of Vance and Delacroix Luxuries was breathtaking. Amanda's event planning company wasn't just failing, it was a catastrophic black hole of debt. She and her business partner, Paige Delacroix, had taken out a massive, high-interest commercial loan to finance a spectacular New Year's Eve gala in Manhattan the previous year. The gala was supposed to be their crowning achievement, a networking event that would elevate them to the elite echelon of high society. Instead, a severe blizzard had grounded flights, and less than 20% of the ticket holders showed up. They lost over $500,000 in a single night. To keep the illusion alive, Amanda had resorted to a desperate shell game. She was leasing the Porsche Cayenne for $1,800 a month to maintain appearances. She was renting a luxury penthouse in the city for $12 a month, and she was paying for all of it with my $15,000 medical trust. I traced the exact routing of the funds. On the first of the month, the trust wired $15,000 to the intermediary account. On the second of the month, $14,600 was wired to the Vance and Delacroix corporate account. And from there, the expenditures were sickening: $2,400 to a premium med spa in Soho for Botox and dermal fillers, $300 to a boutique in Paris for a custom silk gown, $4,500 to a luxury catering company to host a casual brunch for her wealthy socialite friends. While I was shivering under 2 sleeping bags, eating cold canned soup because the microwave drew too much power and tripped the circuit breaker, my sister was injecting my medical funds into her forehead to prevent wrinkles. I took high-resolution screenshots of every single transaction. I downloaded the PDFs of the bank statements, the emails between Amanda and Paige panicking about their impending bankruptcy, and the fraudulent wire transfers. I organized them into a heavily encrypted, color-coded digital dossier. But digital evidence, while damning, can sometimes be contested in court by a highly paid defense attorney, claiming the accounts were hacked by an unknown third party. I needed tangible, physical proof of her malice in the real world. I needed to prove she was actively intercepting my physical mail to cover her tracks. The mail at the estate was delivered to a large wrought iron mailbox at the end of the half-mile gravel driveway. I had noticed that my mail had become strangely sparse. I wasn't receiving bank statements from my personal checking account. I wasn't receiving the standard medical explanation of benefits from my insurance company. I decided to set a trap, a brilliant low-tech engineering trap. I took a standard white envelope. Inside, I placed a crisp $50 bill, part of the pathetic $400 Amanda had given me. On the front of the envelope, I wrote in bold black marker, "Clara Vance, personal and confidential, do not forward." I used my crutches to make the grueling, agonizing half-mile walk down the gravel driveway in the freezing wind. I taped the envelope to the inside wall of the mailbox, positioning it so it would be immediately visible to anyone opening the metal door. Then I applied the tamper seal. I pulled a single long strand of my own dark hair. I laid the hair horizontally across the sealed flap of the envelope. Using a tiny bottle of clear nail polish I had found in one of the guest bathrooms, I placed a microscopic dot of polish on the left end of the hair, securing it to the flap, and another microscopic dot on the right end, securing it to the body of the envelope. It is an old espionage technique. If someone opens the envelope, the hair snaps. If they try to reseal it, the broken hair remains, an undeniable testament to the intrusion. I checked the mailbox every single morning. Day 1, untouched, the hair was perfectly intact. Day 2, untouched. Day 3, the hair was snapped cleanly in half. The clear nail polish dots were still firmly in place, but the physical seal had been broken. The envelope had been opened and carefully resealed. I opened the envelope. The $50 bill was gone. Amanda had visited the property while I was asleep. She hadn't even come to the house to check on me. She had simply driven to the end of the driveway, opened my mailbox, sifted through my private correspondence to ensure no official notices were reaching me, stolen the $50 and driven away. I photographed the broken hair seal with my high-resolution camera. I photographed the empty envelope. I documented the date and the exact time of the intrusion. Mail tampering is a federal offense. I added the photographs to the growing monstrous dossier. I had the bank statements, I had the forged power of attorney, I had the cancelled utility logs, I had the proof of federal mails tampering, I had her. She was caught in a steel trap of her own making, and she didn't even know the jaws had closed. But I didn't spring the trap, not yet. Revenge is a dish best served when your opponent believes they have completely won. I needed Amanda to feel invincible. I needed her to host that Thanksgiving dinner, to surround herself with the very people she was trying to impress, to stand at the absolute pinnacle of her fabricated social empire, before I pulled the foundation out from under her. So I waited, and while I waited, I coded. The silence of that freezing stone house became my sanctuary. There were no phone calls, no social obligations, no distractions. There was only the rhythmic mechanical clacking of my keyboard echoing in the cold air. The project I was finalizing was a quantum-resistant AI-driven behavioral encryption protocol. In layman's terms, it was a security system that didn't just look for passwords. It analyzed the exact behavioral patterns of the user, the speed of their keystrokes, the micro-movements of their mouse, the unique rhythm of their digital interactions. If an unauthorized user managed to steal a password and log in, the AI would instantly recognize that the behavioral rhythm was wrong and lock the system down in milliseconds. It was a paradigm-shifting technology. It was the holy grail of corporate cybersecurity. I worked 20 hours a day. I slept in 4-hour shifts, buried under the heavy sleeping bags, dreaming in lines of code. The physical pain in my spine became a dull, distant hum, eclipsed by the sheer blinding focus of my work. When your body is broken and your environment is actively hostile, your mind becomes your only weapon. I sharpened my mind until it was a lethal, razor-edged blade. On November 12th, I compiled the final build of the software. I ran a series of aggressive penetration tests against the protocol, using every hacking technique I had ever learned to try and break my own system. It held. It was impenetrable. I uploaded the compiled code to a highly secure decentralized server. Then, using my encrypted satellite uplink, I sent a blind presentation pitch to the executive boards of the 3 largest tech conglomerates in the world. I didn't use my real name. I used the corporate entity I had quietly registered years ago. Aegis Protocol LLC's was instantaneous. The sheer audacity and the undeniable mathematical proof of my algorithm sent shockwaves through their security divisions. Within 48 hours, I had 3 competing acquisition offers sitting in my encrypted inbox. The bidding war was fierce, bloodless, and entirely digital. I negotiated the terms via secure text-based channels, refusing to appear on video, citing extreme security protocols. In reality, I didn't want them to see a pale, shivering 32-year-old woman wearing fingerless gloves in a freezing room. On November 18th, the final offer was solidified. A multinational tech titan, one whose operating systems run on half the computers on the planet, offered an outright, unconditional buyout of the algorithm and the exclusive patent rights. The final acquisition price, $800,000. I signed the digital contracts using a secure cryptographic key. 3 days later, the wire transfer hit my offshore holding account. I sat in my grandfather's dark, freezing study. The ceramic space heater buzzed quietly by my feet. I looked at the screen. The number was so large it didn't even look real. It looked like a phone number, or a glitch in the Matrix. $800 million. I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I didn't feel a sudden rush of euphoria. What I felt was a cold, absolute, terrifying calm. It was the calm of a god looking down at a chessboard where the opponent has just moved their final pawn, entirely unaware that checkmate occurred 10 moves ago. Amanda was stealing $15,000 a month to pay for a leased Porsche and Botox. I had just secured $800 million in liquid capital. The disparity in our realities was so astronomical it was almost comical. I closed the laptop, I packed the digital dossier, the photographs, the forged power of attorney, and the banking routing logs into a heavy physical manila folder. I wanted the evidence to be tangible. I wanted Amanda to see the physical weight of her crimes drop onto the mahogany table. Thanksgiving was 5 days away. I called a private transportation service and arranged for a discreet, armored black SUV to pick me up at the end of the gravel driveway on Thanksgiving afternoon. I didn't tell Amanda I was coming. She had sent a patronizing text message 2 days prior. "So sad you won't be able to make it to Thanksgiving dinner, Clara. The city is just too chaotic for you right now. I'll bring you some leftovers this weekend." Miss Usoxo, she didn't want me there. She wanted to control the narrative. She wanted to tell Uncle Richard and the rest of the family how bravely I was fighting, how much of a burden the estate was, and how she was heroically managing my care. She needed the stage to herself. I was about to walk onto her stage and burn the entire theater to the ground. When the black SUV arrived on Thanksgiving Day, I stepped out of the freezing house. I wore the same oversized cashmere sweater, intentionally looking frail and exhausted. I leaned heavily on my crutches, making sure my physical vulnerability was the very first thing everyone would see. The drive into the city took 2 hours. I sat in the heated leather seat of the SUV, feeling the warmth seep into my aching bones for the first time in 2 months. I watched the snow-covered landscape blur past the tinted windows. When we arrived at Amanda's luxury high-rise, the doorman hesitated when he saw me. A woman in an oversized sweater and crutches didn't fit the aesthetic of the building. But I gave him Amanda's penthouse number and he reluctantly buzzed me up. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer. The noise of the party hit me like a physical wave. The clinking of crystal, the roar of laughter, the heavy bass of jazz music playing over a premium sound system. I limped into the grand dining room. The table was a masterpiece of pretentious excess. Towering centerpieces of white roses, silver candelabras, and place settings that cost more than my entire wardrobe. Amanda was standing at the head of the table, holding a glass of vintage champagne, laughing loudly at a joke Uncle Richard had just made. She was wearing the custom silk gown I had tracked in my financial audit, the $3,100 dress paid for by my medical trust. She turned and she saw me for a fraction of a second. Before her socialite programming kicked in, I saw the genuine, unadulterated terror eyes. I was the ghost she had banished to the freezing mountains, and I had just walked into her dinner party. "Clara," she shrieked, the pitch of voice unnaturally high. She slammed her champagne glass onto the table and rushed toward me, her silk gown rustling. "Oh my God, what are you doing here? I thought you were too sick to travel." She enveloped me in a tight, suffocating hug, whispering furiously into my ear where no one else could hear. "What the hell are you doing? You look like a homeless person. Go sit in the kitchen until I can get rid of you." She pulled back, beaming a radiant smile to the rest of the room. "Look everyone, my brave little sister made it after all. It's a Thanksgiving miracle." "Hello Amanda," I said quietly. Uncle Richard stood up, his face softening with genuine affection. "Clara, my dear, come sit by me. We are so glad you're here. Let me take your coat." "I don't have a coat, Uncle Richard," I said, allowing him to help me into the heavy velvet chair at the far end of the mahogany table. "Just this sweater." Amanda shot me a look of pure venom, quickly masking it with a frantic smile as she ordered a catering waiter to set another place at the table. The dinner proceeded. I sat in silence, eating very little, watching the dynamics of the room. I watched Amanda hold court. I watched her lie about the success of her business. I watched her accept compliments on the expensive wine, the lavish decor, the sheer scale of her fabricated wealth. And then, as the dessert plates were being cleared, Uncle Richard turned his attention to me. He leaned in, his voice filled with the paternal concern of a man who believed the system was working exactly as he had designed it. "Clara," he said softly, his voice cutting through the clinking of fine silver. "Has the $15,000 a month Amanda has been sending you from the trust finally made your recovery comfortable?" I didn't answer immediately. I slowly lowered my water glass to the table. I looked down at my hands. "Uncle Richard," I said, my voice steady, carrying the quiet, dangerous calm of a woman who has endured the absolute limits of human betrayal. "I haven't had heat in the estate since October 4th. The boiler has been deliberately shut off. I have been sleeping in a ski jacket and 2 sleeping bags for 7 weeks. His face changed. It didn't happen all at once. First there was profound confusion, then the rapid calculation of an attorney, and finally a dark, horrified realization. What do you mean you haven't had heat? Richard demanded, the temperature in the dining room plummeting instantly. I mean the fuel tank is bone dry, I replied, my eyes locking onto my older sister. I mean the utility accounts were cancelled. I mean I haven't seen a single cent of that $15,000 a month. Amanda's face lost every drop of its color. The $200 Cartier earrings dangling from her ears suddenly looked very heavy. She opened her mouth, a rehearsed, patronizing smile attempting to stretch across her face. Clara is just confused, Richard. Her medication makes her exaggerate things. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I simply reached under my chair, pulled out the thick, meticulously organized manila folder and dropped it onto the mahogany table. I am not confused, Amanda, I said, a cold, empty smile touching my lips. And I am definitely not exaggerating, but why don't we look at the financial routing data? I unclasped the manila folder and spread the documents across the polished mahogany. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke with the precise, methodical cadence of an engineer disassembling a malfunctioning machine. Exhibit A, I said, sliding a thick stack of bank statements toward Uncle Richard. The routing logs, they show the exact transfer of $14,600 from the medical trust intermediary account directly into the primary business checking account of Vance and Delacroix Luxuries. This transfer occurred on the 2nd of every month for the past 14 months. Richard put on his reading glasses. The jovial, holiday atmosphere of the room evaporated instantly, replaced by a dense, suffocating tension. The socialite guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, sensing that they had just walked into a legal execution. Exhibit B, I continued, sliding another document forward. A notarized power of attorney document submitted to the Catskills local utility and heating oil providers. It was used to permanently cancel the automatic oil delivery, the premium homeowner's insurance, and the private security monitoring. The signature at the bottom is a forgery. That is a lie. Amanda shrieked, her voice cracking, the pitch soaring into hysteria. She is lying, Richard. You know she has a brain injury. She is paranoid. I have been sending her everything. If you have been sending her everything, Amanda, Richard said, his voice dropping into a terrifying, lethal whisper as he examined the bank statements, then why does this ledger show a $3.100 payment to a Parisian boutique on the exact same day the trust funds cleared your account? Amanda's mouth opened and closed. She looked around the table, desperately searching for an ally among her wealthy friends. But high society is remarkably Darwinian. When the scent of federal fraud fills the room, the elite scatter. Her friends stared at their plates, avoiding eye contact at all costs. Exhibit C, I said, placing 3 high-resolution photographs onto the table. Federal mail tampering. Amanda visited the estate on November 12th. She opened my secure mailbox, broke a microscopic tamper-evident seal I had installed, removed a $50 bill from a sealed envelope, and drove away without ever stepping foot inside the house to check on my physical condition. You set a trap for me. Amanda gasped, taking a step back from the table as if the photographs were radioactive. You psychotic bitch, you were spying on me. I wasn't spying, Amanda, I replied, leaning back in my heavy velvet chair. I was conducting an audit, you see. You made a fundamental miscalculation when you decided to freeze me out. You assumed that because my body was temporarily broken, my mind was equally fragile. You assumed that my silence equated to submission. I was going to pay it back. Amanda burst into tears, real desperate tears, the kind of tears that only flow when a narcissist realizes that every single exit door has been bolted shut. The business was struggling. We lost 2 massive galas because of the blizzard. I just needed a bridge loan. She was fine in that house. She didn't need that much money. She just sits on her computer all day doing nothing. I don't do nothing, Amanda, I said softly. The absolute calm in my voice cut through her hysterical sobbing like a scalpel. I reached into the very back of the manila folder and pulled out a single heavy stock sheet of paper. It was the confirmation of the wire transfer from the Federal Reserve, heavily redacted to protect the identity of the acquiring corporation, but clearly displaying the final balance. You see, I continued, my voice echoing in the silent dining room. While you were stealing $15,000 a month from my medical fund to pay for your leased Porsche, and leaving me to freeze in a stone cabin, I was actually working. I spent 20 hours a day in a 45-degree room finishing the quantum-resistant cybersecurity protocol I've been developing for the last 3 years. I slid the single sheet of paper down the mahogany table. It stopped directly in front of Amanda. "I sold my company 3 days ago," I said, staring directly into her terrified, tear-streaked eyes. For $800 million, the sound that left Amanda's throat was not a word. It was a strangled, suffocating gasp, like a diver running out of oxygen. She stared at the number on the paper, 8 followed by 8 zeros. It was a number so incomprehensibly massive that it completely short-circuited her reality. Uncle Richard dropped the banking documents. He stared at me as if I had just commanded the sun to rise in the west and set in the east. 800 million. Richard whispered, the seasoned corporate attorney entirely at a loss for words. "Yes," I said. I placed my hands on the table and pushed myself up. I didn't reach for my crutches. The physical therapy I had forced myself to endure in the freezing cold had worked. I stood tall, straight, and completely unbroken. "You thought I was weak, Amanda," I said, looking down at my older sister. The woman who had spent my entire life treating me as an antisocial liability. "You thought because I was quiet and because I was hurt that I was easy prey. You wanted my resources, but you didn't want to look at my face. You thought you could freeze me out and wait for me to break." "Clara, please," Amanda sobbed, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she reached across the table, trying to grab my sweater. "Please, I'm your sister. You have $800 million. You can save the business, you can drop the charges. Please, Clara, I'll go to jail." I looked at her. I felt absolutely nothing: anger, no pity, no residual sibling loyalty, just the cold, clinical satisfaction of a successfully executed algorithm. "You're right," I said quietly. "I do have $800 million and you are going to federal prison. The forged power of attorney alone carries a Class D felony in this state. The wire fraud, the mail tampering, and the exploitation of a medical trust. You are looking at a decade behind bars." I picked up my crutches purely because I preferred the aesthetic of walking out with the tools I no longer needed, and turned toward the door. "Clara." "Wait!" Amanda screamed, lunging across the table, knocking over a crystal wine glass that shattered violently against the hardwood floor. I didn't turn back. I walked out of the penthouse, the heavy mahogany doors closing automatically behind me, sealing Amanda inside the tomb of her own creation. I took the elevator down to the lobby, stepped into the freezing New York air, and got into the waiting black SUV that I had purchased in cash that morning. Here is how the fallout settled in the months that followed, because I know you want the ledger, and an auditor never leaves a ledger unbalanced. Uncle Richard, acting as the primary executor of our grandfather's larger estate, immediately froze all of Amanda's assets. He was furious not just at the theft but at the sheer audacity of Amanda treating a family trust like her personal slush fund. He handed my meticulously organized dossier directly to the district attorney's office. Amanda was arrested 3 weeks later. The physical evidence, the routing numbers, the forged signatures, the IP logs, the mail tampering photographs was entirely insurmountable. Her high-priced defense attorney took one look at the dossier and advised her to plead guilty to avoid a public, drawn-out trial that would inevitably result in a maximum sentence. She pleaded guilty to wire fraud and elder abuse, a charge that applied because the trust was technically still operating under our late grandfather's Federal Protection Clause. She was sentenced to 4 years in a federal minimum security facility. Her event planning business, Vance & Delacroix Luxuries, filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy immediately. Her business partner, Paige Delacroix, turned state's witness in exchange for immunity, testifying that Amanda had orchestrated the entire embezzlement scheme. The Porsche Cayenne was repossessed, the luxury penthouse was vacated, her high society friends, the ones who had laughed and drank expensive wine at that Thanksgiving table, vanished overnight. High society does not tolerate the stench of federal indictments. It is a world built entirely on optics, and Amanda's optics had become radioactive. And what about me? I went back to the Catskills estate. But this time I didn't live in the cold. I completely renovated the property from the ground up. I installed a state-of-the-art geothermal heating system that operates entirely off the grid. I hired a private live-in chef and the best neuromuscular physical therapist in the country. I healed completely. Today I walk without a limp, without pain, and without crutches. I didn't buy a mega yacht or a private jet. Wealth, true generational wealth, is quiet. I took a significant portion of the $800 million and established a massive, heavily endowed foundation specifically designed to assist victims of financial abuse and covert guardianships. I employ a dedicated team of aggressive forensic accountants and corporate litigators who do nothing but trace stolen money, dismantle toxic conservatorships, and return the funds to the vulnerable people who were targeted. People ask me sometimes if I regret doing it the way I did. If I regret waiting until Thanksgiving to drop the bomb in front of the entire family, effectively destroying the holiday and ensuring Amanda's public humiliation. I tell them I don't regret a single millisecond of it. The holidays are exactly when toxic families demand your maximum compliance. They use the aesthetic of family gatherings, the turkey, the wine, the forced smiles, to enforce their hierarchy. They expect you to sit quietly, eat the food, and pretend that the knife isn't sticking out of your back. They rely on your politeness, they count on your desire to keep the peace. I refuse to keep their peace. I chose to enforce my own. If you take one lesson from this story, let it be this. Your silence does not protect you from people who view your existence as a resource to be mined. Love people freely but never hand over the keys to your survival. Keep the bank accounts locked, read every single line of every contract. If someone asks you to sign a power of attorney, question their motives relentlessly. And if someone ever shuts off the heat in your house, do not cry. Do not beg them to turn it back on. Gather the evidence, build your empire in the freezing cold. Sharpen your mind until it is a lethal weapon, and wait for the absolute perfect moment to burn their grand illusions to the ground. The silence of an empire builder is never submission. It is preparation. When you are dealing with narcissists, your silence is the most terrifying weapon in your arsenal, because they cannot manipulate what you do not say. They project their own insecurities onto your quiet exterior, assuming you are weak, assuming you are compliant. And all the while, you are building the exact infrastructure needed to dismantle their entire world. Justice, in my experience, is rarely swift. True justice is a slow burn. It is the delayed gratification of knowing that you hold all the cards and waiting for the exact right moment to lay them on the table. Amanda thought she was playing a game of social chess, trying to maneuver me off the board entirely. She didn't realize until it was far too late that I owned the board, I owned the pieces, and I was financing the very room the game was being played in. I am Clara Vance. I am not the broken antisocial liability they thought I was. I am the CEO who sold her company for $800 million. I am the woman who walked away without looking back. And I am the sister who finally broke the generational curse of our family by refusing to fund it. To the women out there who are quietly building their own empires, whether that empire is a multi-million-dollar tech startup, a small business, or simply a life of peace and absolute financial independence away from toxic relatives, keep building. Let them underestimate you, let them mock your quiet lifestyle, let them relegate you to the background of their minds. Because one day they will desperately need something from you. And on that day you will look at them with the calm, cold fury of a woman who knows her exact worth. And you will simply say no. And in that single syllable, you will reclaim every piece of yourself that they ever tried to steal. That is my story: a freezing cabin, a stolen medical trust fund, and an $800 million check that balanced the ledger forever. If this story empowered you, if it reminded you that your quiet strength is your greatest weapon, hit the subscribe button, drop a comment below, and share your own experiences. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member? Have you ever had to enforce a boundary that completely disrupted the family dynamic? I read every single comment, and I want to hear your stories of resilience and empowerment. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode of Alpha Mom Stories. Remember, the woman they underestimate the most is usually the one writing the final code. Stay strong, stay silent, and build your empire. I will see you in the next video. Before we officially close out this chapter, I want to take a brief moment to reflect on the nature of the cold fury that so many of us rely on to survive. When you are pushed to the absolute edge by the people who are supposed to protect you, society often expects you to react with explosive anger. They expect the shouting matches, the dramatic confrontations, the chaotic emotional breakdowns. But true female empowerment, especially in the face of covert, manipulative abuse, is entirely different. It is the icy, unshakable calm that settles into your bones when you finally realize that the people hurting you are not powerful, they are simply desperate. Amanda's desperation was loud. It was designer clothes, leased Porsches, and frantic social climbing. My power was silent. It was lines of code, encrypted dossiers, and the quiet endurance of sleeping in a freezing room while the rest of the world thought I was broken. You do not need to prove your strength by screaming it from the rooftops. Let them believe you are defeated. Let them believe you are sitting quietly in the back row. Let them exhaust themselves performing for an audience that doesn't care about them. Your only job is to protect your energy, document their transgressions, and build your fortress brick by brick, algorithm by algorithm, dollar by. The most terrifying thing you can be to a toxic person is entirely independent of their chaos. Thank you again for watching. Remember to protect your peace, secure your assets, and never, ever apologize for walking away. I will see you next time.